darkness dry. Oh God, sing with me how great. And age to age you stands, and time is in his hands. Beginning and the end, beginning and the end. God and three in one. Father, Spirit, Son. Sing with me how great is our God. No one see how great, great is our God. Oh, praise. My heart will sing how great is our God. How great is our God. How great is our God. Sing with me how great is our God. No one will see how great is our God. Thank you. You may be seated.
All right, it is really good to be with you guys tonight. It is especially good to be with you because I was scheduled to teach this lesson on March 15th. We get to worship together and also get to know some of you guys on camp over the last few weeks. That was neat to get to know some new faces and meet some new people. So super excited to be here with you guys and super excited to kind of finish up the study through Colossians. So turn with me to the book of Colossians. So this is going to be a little unique because typically like we teach through a book from the, and we don't have like COVID right in the middle of it all. This is a little bit different circumstance. Colossians 2:16 through 17. Let's read that together. Colossians 2:16 through 17. Therefore, no one is to act as your judge in regard to food or drink, or in respect to a festival or a new moon or a Sabbath day, things which are a mere shadow of what is to come, but the substance belongs to Christ. The idea, you can write this down, the idea of this verse is to, let's just back up a little bit and kind of see the context of what's happening in this book of Colossians and what's happening in chapter 2 so far. I don't know. Oh, well. What's happening in Colossians? I'll do it again. Is that me? Is the guitar turned off?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. We'll see how this goes. Ooh, cool. Alright. Anyway, we're back. Alright, everybody with me? We good? Alright. Colossians 2:16 and 17. The first word. What is the first word in that verse? Colossians 2:16. Just yell it out. You don't have to raise your hand. Therefore. Good job, guys. Therefore. Alright, so the word therefore is a really important word. But I think a lot of times it's kind of hard to understand exactly what it means. So let's break it down like this. The word therefore, you can take it in two parts. There and forward. Okay? So there and forward. So you know what the word there means. You use it every day, right? It's kind of, what's going forward, right? Also a familiar word. That's the idea of this word. And so essentially what it means is because of what I said over there, what I say going forward is going to make sense. See that? I said this over here, and now this over here should make sense. And so we're going to look back at what he said there so that we can understand going forward in our text. Tracking? Cool. All right, so the big picture of the book of Colossians. This is what he's been saying there. So what is the theme of the book of Colossians? Bingo. Very good. All sufficiency of Christ. What does the word sufficiency mean? Okay, yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah, yeah.
If something is sufficient and not, it means no.
Ah, very good. Okay, so enough, it's sufficient, that means you don't need more. I like that definition. Good job, guys. So, yeah, like you said, it's all that we need. So when we say Christ is all sufficient, that means that Christ is everything we need. We don't need besides Christ. Now let me give you an example of something that was pretty sufficient. There is a restaurant, whoa, that's loud, called Saltgrass Steakhouse. Maybe been there before? It's good. It's kind of expensive, but we have special deals. So like on your birthday month, you can go for half off. And so we went last week, and with that steak, they bring out like the bread and stuff beforehand, and they bring out like your potato soup or whatever it is, and then you get the steak and the sweet potato fries, like the best sweet potato fries I've ever had. This steak is just like, oh, it's so good. And you're just like, I could die right now. It's amazing. And like everybody, just like, oh, it's so good. And you're, eating this meal, and it's very filling, and I'm just so full, and it's so good. And then the waitress comes up, and what does the waitress always ask? Do you have room for
Dessert!
dessert? And you know what I told her? I said, this was my dessert. This was so good, and I am so full, I don't even have room for dessert, even if I wanted it. So that meal was so sufficient, right? It was so good. There's everything I needed. I didn't need anything else besides that meal. I didn't need dessert on that. I had everything I needed right there. Now, when we talk about Christ being all sufficient, he's way better than ribeye steak. Okay? He is way more sufficient. So the idea of Jesus being all sufficient means that he is everything that we need. We don't need anything more beyond him. And that's so important to understand our text. So let me show you in chapter 2 how Paul is explaining that Christ is all we need. Okay? Look down at chapter 2, verse 2. He's saying about this church that he wants for their hearts to be encouraged, having been knit together in love, and attaining to all the wealth that comes from the full assurance of understanding, resulting in a true knowledge of God's mystery, that is Christ himself, in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. So a lot of words in that verse. And then the true knowledge of the mystery, which is Christ. He's saying, look, there's a great wealth in understanding who Christ is and knowing him. And, appear to have wisdom, but their ideas are insufficient. Look, they seem convincing. It seems like they're right, but what they have to offer is not sufficient. Don't be deceived by that. Jesus is way better. Verse 8, and this is going to really set the stage for our verse tonight. See to it that no one takes you captive through philosophy and empty deception, according to the tradition of men, according to the elementary principles of the world, rather than according to Christ. Saying, don't be deceived by the insufficient. Jesus is better. Now he explains how Jesus is better. In verses 9 through 15, we're just going to skim real quick. Verse 9, for in him all the fullness of deity dwells in bodily form. This is God. Jesus is God. He's not something lesser. He is God himself. And in him you have been made complete, and he is the head over all rule and authority. And he talks about all these things. In him you have all these blessings. He has done all of these things. He is so great. And then in verse 13, when you were dead in your transgressions and the uncircumcision of your flesh, he made you alive together with him, having forgiven us all our trespasses. How did he do that? Verse 14, having canceled out the certificate of debt consisting of decrees against us, hostile to us. And he's taken it out of the way, having nailed it to the cross. From today, from the last hour, from the last 10 minutes, what you were thinking, what you said, when you talked back to your parents, when you were angry with your sibling, when you thought that thought you shouldn't have, you said that thing, all of that right here on this list. That would be a little, he took that and he nailed it to the cross. He took it out of the way by nailing it to the cross. But think about that. What was nailed to the cross? Was it a piece of paper? No, it was Jesus. Look, Jesus became your sin. He became that certificate of debt that was hostile to you, and he was nailed to the cross for you so that you could be saved. That's the only way we can be saved. Because of his death, his life, his substitution on our behalf, and therefore, we can't let anything or anyone push us away from Christ into something that is not sufficient. Look at verse 16. Therefore, no one is to act as your judge in regard to food or drink, festival, new moon, Sabbath day. That's kind of weird. Like, how do you not be judged? Right? You're like, stop judging me. Stop. I know what you're thinking. Don't judge me. Right? Like, that doesn't, you can't. That's not going to work, right? So that's probably not what he's saying. So think about if you run a red light. Of course, you'd be driving illegally because you're too young to drive, so that's an additional crime. But you run a red light, and the judge, you get a ticket, go to the judge, and the judge says, okay, there's something you should not have done and something you should have done, right? You should not have run through that red light, and you should have stopped that light, right? And then how does that judge affect what you do? Well, it makes you do it, right? He makes you stop running red lights, and if you don't, he puts you in jail. And so how do you not be judged? Well, you can't stop them from judging you. Something specific in mind that they could be judged for. So let's ask that question. Why might people judge them? Well, look at the next part of the verse. In verse 16, no one is actually judged in regard to food or drink, or respect to a festival, or a new moon, or a Sabbath day. Okay? So look at the main idea of that is that people would judge them for not keeping the Old Testament law. Okay? All of those things, what they have in common is they're all part of the Old Testament law. So look at that first one. And we'll take each of these one at a time to see what they were doing with them then, and then how that should affect us today. So what is that first item in that list? No one acts as your judge in regard to food. Thank you. Good job. Food. So this refers to the dietary laws in the Old Testament. Have you heard of those? They're laid out in Leviticus 11, and that's where it talks about like the animals, birds, fish, bugs, and stuff you can or can't eat. You can't eat a cow because about what you can and can't eat. Now, I don't think most of you struggle with not eating bacon, right? That's not as applicable today as it was then. But you know what? There are ways that people try to take those laws and pressure you or apply them today. There are people who might say that you need to have this diet, or it's better, it's not a sin to eat bacon, but it's better if you don't, right? God made us to eat vegetables and these kinds of things, not priests, because there's a few times when priests aren't allowed to drink alcohol. Number 6 lays out the rules for the Nazirite vow. You might not be familiar with that, but there was a Nazirite you know of named Samson. He was a unique case because he was a Nazirite his whole life, so that means he was not allowed to drink alcohol for his whole life. There are a few rules regarding drinks for them. Now today, there's alcohol. In fact, you can't even buy alcohol. In fact, you know what? You better just not even go down the alcohol aisle of Walmart. Okay? That's what they say. And that's legalism. Because that is not legal. Next item in that list. Somebody shouted out. Holidays that the Israelites observed. Just like we have Christmas, Easter, Thanksgiving, etc. These are their holidays. The big 3 would be Passover, Pentecost, and for those 3 they had to travel to Jerusalem. And then there are 4 others. The feast of these holidays, and really all of the law, pointed to Christ. But I think we can see that pretty clearly with the example of the Passover. You guys are familiar with Passover, right? Remember what's happening there? The Israelites are captive in Egypt. And God said, okay, you guys are about to roast in its blood. You need to eat the lamb and the wine that goes with that, or the Passover meal. And then if you do those things, the angel of death will pass over you and not kill your firstborn son. Sound familiar? Think about Jesus, the spotless lamb, who ultimately the promised land. Just like it represents how we have the opportunity to be freed from sin and eventually spend eternity with God. And so all of those things point to Christ. And that's important to know because with legalism, you are pointing away from Christ. You're being pressured away from Him. And today, I think some of these feasts can become legalistic observances. Now, it's not wrong to learn about Passover and to study those things. But we have to be careful. I think it's better to do that. And you don't have to observe Passover. That's part of the law. Paul's saying don't feel pressured into that kind of legalism. Next item on the list after festivals is, see that in your text? The new moon. This is a monthly ceremony. You good with that? Cool. To the Sabbath, last thing on the list. See that last item? In regard to the Sabbath. This is a weekly ceremony. So we saw annual, monthly, and now weekly ceremonies. This is explained a lot of places in the Old Testament. I think the one that's most familiar is in Exodus 20. Remember, Exodus 20 is where the Ten Commandments are given. It says, remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy. And that was Saturday. Now, today, a few others kind of along those lines. And you know what? That's legalism. That's not a law that God has given us today to observe. Because the laws that were given to the Jews, they show us our sin. There's that book more if you're curious to see. But a key verse from that book is Galatians 3:24 and 25. He says, so then the law was our guardian until Christ came. And I think we understand that pretty well today. But that was not the case in the church of Colossae in the first century. Because back then, and really in a lot of books of the New Testament, there was an issue where you've got a church made up of both Gentiles and Jews. So you've got these people over here, and they were raised Gentiles, and they were like worshiping demons and stuff, and eating whatever they wanted, and eating that. And then you got these Jews over here, and they spent their whole lives observing all of these laws. And it's like, well, we can't eat bacon, that's wrong, it's a sin. And it's just like, wait, what are you doing eating bacon, you terrible person? And then